Hey y'all, so today I'm going to be sharing the 30 books that Marie Kondo couldn't make me part with. I've seen this video done by a few booktubers, but the first one I saw was Lena Norms, so I will leave a link up in the cards to her video. Essentially, the idea for this video is a bit of response to the drama that happened on Twitter when people started talking about Marie Kondo saying that she prefers to only own 30 books. Long story short, some people thought that she was suggesting that everyone should only own 30 books, and a lot of people got personally offended by that, but these people clearly haven't actually read her book or know anything about the KonMari method, because she doesn't say that at all. I've done the KonMari method myself and I've made videos about it, so I'm not dragging Marie Kondo by making this, nor was Lena dragging Marie Kondo. It's just kind of a fun idea. If I had to get rid of all but 30 of my books, which 30 would I keep? Now, in my last video, I did actually pack up almost my entire library except for about 30 books because I am temporarily moving here to stay with my parents for a little while. And although I did pick about 30 books for that, this is a totally different list. And I actually wanted to start this out by explaining how I chose the books that I was going to keep, because I feel like there are several different methods of tackling this, and I wanted to talk about what way I chose to tackle it. So I decided to do this as if I were planning to continue to live like this, as if I were Marie Kondo herself deciding to continue to only own 30 books for the foreseeable future. Basically, I want to do this as realistically as possible. If I were actually going to get rid of all of my books except for 30 of them, this is legitimately the ones I would keep. So because of that, I therefore had several factors that I had to keep in mind when doing this. Because I think if I were to only keep 30 books, I would want most of them to be my favorite books and series, rather than a lot of my unread books. Because it's pretty easy to get something from the library and then return it, or to get an ebook copy or an audiobook copy. Additionally, if I am going to keep mostly my favorite books, I don't want them to just be the obvious predictable ones. I want it to be ones that have sentimental value, or that I plan on rereading, or honestly, some of the prettier ones. Because if I'm gonna have physical books in my collection and my favorite ones, why not include my favorite pretty ones, the ones that I enjoy looking at? Because again, ebooks exist and audiobooks exist, so the physical copies that I'm going to keep, make it the pretty ones. But on the topic of unread books, an important point for me to consider is that where I'm currently living does not have the best public library. So there are some books that I own that I'm wanting to read within the next few months that my local public library simply doesn't have. So if I wanted to read them, I'd either have to get an ebook copy, an audiobook copy, or repurchase them in some form or fashion. So in that case, I generally opted to actually keep those unread books in lieu of some books that I have read that I wanted to keep, simply because I'd have to repurchase them if I want to read them in the near future. But also on the same topic, my public library doesn't have some of my favorite books, so I had to really strike a balance between which favorite books I kept and which unread books I kept. And as you can tell from what I've said thus far, obviously I'm taking into account ebooks and audiobooks. I'm not counting those as part of the 30 books because those aren't physical volumes that I have to store somewhere. Those are just, I guess I do have to store them on my phone or on my Kindle, but they're not physical items that I have to find a location for. Plus, there are actually certain books or series or authors whose books I enjoy listening to on audiobook more than reading physically. So again, another thing to take into account. So that's kind of how I made decisions. Enough rambling, let's get into the 30 books. And some of these books are currently packed away for one reason or another, so if I don't have them with me, they're just gonna be right here. So we're gonna start out with the most obvious ones, because no matter what way I slice it, I want to keep my physical copies of Harry Potter. But of course, it's not just as simple as keeping all 7 books, because there are so many different editions, and I own at least 3 editions of each, so that got a little complicated. I opted to keep the illustrated edition of both Sorcerer's Stone and Chamber of Secrets because I have the illustrated edition and it is the full book, so why not just keep the illustrated one? I don't yet have the Prisoner of Azkaban illustrated edition. I know I'm terrible, but if I did have that, I'd keep that instead of the hardcover copy that I do have, but I don't. So The rest of the books, I'm keeping my hardcover editions. That's especially important for me when talking about the 6th and 7th books because I got those on their release days, so those are special to me, so I definitely couldn't part with either of those. Additionally, I'm also going to be keeping the Korean edition of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Now, it is technically in 2 volumes, but it's one book. I don't know why it's published in 2 volumes. It's annoying, but I am going to keep both of these and count them as one book because it's literally one book. I don't know why they published it like this. If you are not aware, I am studying Korean and I use this as a study tool, so this is definitely more of a like functionality thing versus me keeping my favorite book because I do have the illustrated edition already, but I'm gonna keep this for studying purposes. So that's 8 books out of the way already. Number 9 is another necessity for me to keep, and that is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. Currently, I have my mass market paperback edition out, but if I were only to keep one edition because I have multiple, I would definitely keep my BBC adaptation edition because I got that in England, so it's special because of that, and also it's my favorite cover out of all of them, so I definitely keep that one. But I would also keep another edition, my Korean edition. This is number 10 on the list. Again, it's another study tool. This is the last Korean edition you're gonna see. But yeah, I use this as a study tool, so I'm keeping this. So And Then There Were None, if you haven't heard about this book somehow in like the 80 to 90 years it's been out, I don't know how long. Anyway, And Then There Were None centers around 10 people who are invited to this island, and they all start dying one by one, and they realize one of them is probably murdering everyone else. Dun dun dun! It's my favorite standalone novel of all time. I have to keep it. Next up is an entire trilogy in physical form, even though I only have books 2 and 3 out with me right now, and that is the Bone Season series by Samantha Shannon. This is book 2, The Mime Order, and book 3, The Song Rising, and the first one is The Bone Season. This takes place in a dystopian society where some people have clairvoyant abilities, but it is extremely, extremely illegal to even have clairvoyant abilities, not even to just use them, to have them. And our main character, Paige, works in an underground clairvoyant gang, and it's just a really interesting story. There's much more to it than just that, but I don't want to spoil anything. It's a cool series. I love it. Of the series, this was the one I was definitely keeping because this is a signed copy and it's my favorite ongoing series, so this was definitely one that I was planning on keeping regardless of whether or not I kept the first and second books. But then when I was thinking about it, I love this series too much to not keep it, and it's kind of one that I want to continue collecting because these books are so pretty, and because I was going to keep the third one and it felt a little awkward to only keep the third one. And I love the buttery covers to these. I don't know, I just love this series, and these are ones that I decided I did want to keep. So those 3 were numbers 11 through 13. The next one, number 14, is the only other signed book on the list, and that is The Diviners by Libba Bray. This is one that I just love this book, and I really only decided to keep these signed editions of books or series that I absolutely love, and The Diviners was like at the top of the list. I don't want to get rid of this book even if it's not signed. I love the series and the first book especially, so definitely keeping that, especially since it's a signed copy. The Diviner series takes place in New York City in the 1920s, and it centers around all these people who are called diviners, who have these very specific special abilities, and it follows multiple storylines and they all weave together, and it's a little creepy. It's just very awesome. And the only reason why The Diviners is the only book in the series I'm keeping is because I love listening to this series on audiobook. So number 15 is one that is almost entirely just for sentimental value, and that is All American Girl by Meg Cabot. This might seem a little random, but this is the book I've owned longer than any other books on my shelves. I've had this since like 4th grade, and it's just one of those books that I really fell in love with as like a child or a preteen, and I just could never bring myself to get rid of it, even though it's been years and years since I reread it. It just holds a really special place in my collection, and I loved it even before I read Harry Potter, so I can't get rid of this book. It's staying in. Next up is one that some people are probably gonna consider kind of cheating, but it's one book, and that is my Death Note all-in-one edition. Yes, it's about this thick, and it is the entire Death Note series in one volume, and not only is it a beautiful edition, but also it's an entire 6-volume series in one little book. Within the Death Note series, our main character, Light, finds the Death Note, which has been dropped by a god of death into the human world. Basically, if you write someone's name in the Death Note, they die. And Light decides to use this to rid the world of people that he deems evil and are not fit to live in the world with the good people. But obviously these criminals start dying and the police kind of catch on to something weird happening, and they hire this guy known only as L to investigate, and thus a battle of wits between two geniuses, Light and L, has begun, and it's just a really awesome series from beginning to end, and I love it so much. And so keeping it all in one edition, yes, please. This one was a no-brainer. It's one of my favorite series of all time. It's a really beautiful edition, especially with the box that it's in, and it's all in one volume, so I can keep all 6 volumes of the manga with one book. Also, it's my favorite manga. This was just an absolute no-brainer. I was obviously keeping this one. It's great. Next up, we've got another trilogy on the list, and that is one that you are probably waiting to hear if you know anything about my videos, and that is the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. The Mistborn series takes place in a world where the bad guy won. The Lord Ruler is evil and he's been ruling for 1,000 years and life sucks. Within this world, people with special magical abilities can ingest specific metals and do specific abilities based on what kind of metal they are able to use, and Mistborns can use all of the metals that can be used for allomancy and do all of the things that can be done with allomancy. And our main character, Vin, is a Mistborn, and she joins up with this ragtag group of people to try and take down the Lord Ruler. I've said many times that The Final Empire is my favorite book that I read since Harry Potter. It's my favorite thing that BookTube helped me discover. I love this trilogy and I need to reread it, and also I love the Brandon Sanderson British editions. They're so pretty. I can't get rid of these. Also, my public library doesn't have physical copies of them, so this was like a no-brainer to keep. Obviously couldn't get rid of these. If my library doesn't even have them, I'd have to re-buy them to reread them. That's not happening. So that takes us through number 19, and number 20 is another Brandon Sanderson book, and it is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. If you asked me to name my favorite Brandon Sanderson book, it would probably be The Final Empire, the first book in the Mistborn trilogy, but a very, very close second that I would have to think very hard about is Warbreaker. Not only do I think this is the prettiest of all of the Brandon Sanderson UK editions, but it's just such an awesome book. That should be really obvious, but it is. The magic system deals with color, and it's so cool to learn about. The world build, as always with Brandon Sanderson, is super interesting, and the characters are also super compelling. It just has everything that I love in a Brandon Sanderson book, in a fantasy book. I have to keep this one. Also, it's pretty. Speaking of pretty books, we're going to move on to another one of my all-time favorite standalones, which also happens to be possibly the most beautiful book I own, and that is The Chimes by Anna Smale. This book has a really low rating on Goodreads, but I really don't get it because I love it so much. And also, look at that cover. It's so stunning. There's so much symbolism in the cover too. Like, you think it's pretty when you first see it, and then you read the book and you understand more of the symbolism, and it's just even better. Anyway, this takes place in a world where people have trouble retaining memories, and it's very music-centric, where people like sing how to get places or just sing other things. It's been a long time since I've read it. It's been like 3 years since I read it, so the intricate details are foggy, but it's very music-centric and the writing is very musical, and it's just really beautifully done, and I couldn't not keep this book. Next up is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This is a fairly recent favorite standalone novel. It's also very beautiful. I love the cover and I love the story, and I just read this entire thing in like a day and a half. I couldn't put it down. It's so awesome, and it's also very beautiful, and I wanted to keep it. If We Were Villains follows these pretty pretentious theater students before, during, and after this like tragic event that happens, and you're kind of trying to figure out what happened and also getting really invested in these characters, and it's just a really, really interesting story, and it's really beautifully written with all these Shakespearean references thrown in. It's really awesome. I love it. Next up is number 23, and that is Battle Royale by Koshin Takami. It's another pretty recent favorite, but it's one that I just couldn't leave off the list. I never got super into the Hunger Games. Like, I liked the concept, but I wasn't ever a huge Hunger Games fan, but Battle Royale blew my socks off. Battle Royale was just so impressive, and I love it. Battle Royale, like the Hunger Games, follow several teenagers as they compete to be the last one surviving in this competition, but unlike the Hunger Games, you actually get to see from almost every single character's perspective, and it's really, really interesting in that way, and it's just a really fun story. Well, no, it's not fun. It's pretty dark, actually, but I really love it. It's a really compelling story. Let's go with that. And it's super entertaining, and it's a massive book, and I love big books, so this one had to stay. Next up is a more longtime favorite, and that is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. Admittedly, I haven't seen the movie for this, but I have read the book twice, and I enjoyed it both times. It's fun, it's dystopian, it's lighthearted, it's one of my favorite standalones of all time. For me, it's just a really fun dystopian. It's super cool. I love the quest aspect of it. I love the gaming aspect of it. I love dystopians. It's really cool. So this next one is going to be 25, and we're now entering the TBR Books zone. So these last 6 are ones that I haven't read, but for one reason or another, I decided to keep it. First up is Elantras by Brandon Sanderson. Mostly I'm keeping this unread book because it's Brandon Sanderson. I think I'm going to really like it, and it matches with the other pretty UK covers. So I figured that if I was going to keep an unread book, I might as well keep one I think I'm going to love that matches with other pretty books that I have. Number 26 is House of Leaves by Mark C. Danielewski. Yes, I still haven't finished it. I'm a disaster, but mostly I'm keeping this because it's my current book, and also it's got unique formatting, so unless I have a physical copy of this, I can't really read it to its fullest, and my library doesn't have this. So if I did only keep 30 books and I read this and I didn't love it, I could always get rid of it and replace it with something else, but for now, definitely keeping it because I'm reading it and my library doesn't have it. This book is hard to describe, but it's written almost like a dissertation about this documentary that exists about this weird house. It's just got a lot of layers, it's very intriguing, and I need to pick it up again soon. In a similar vein, the next book on this list is The Familiar by Mark Z. Danielewski, which I also want to read in the near future, and also has unique formatting, and also my library doesn't have it, so this was just one that I really couldn't get rid of given how soon I want to read it and the fact that I'd have to repurchase it if I wanted to read it. Like with House of Leaves, this is a very layered story dealing with multiple storylines in this case, which I think are denoted by these colors on the pages. I don't know, I haven't even started this. It just sounds really weird, and I'm excited about that. Next up at number 28 is another TBR book that I'm definitely keeping, and that is Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. This is not quite a unique formatting, but it does have a lot of footnotes that would probably get very tiresome to try to use in an ebook copy, and that's all that my public library has, and I'm planning on reading this pretty soon, so I just wouldn't want to get rid of this because I wouldn't want to deal with an ebook copy. I definitely don't want to deal with the audiobook copy because the audiobook doesn't have the footnotes or the end notes. It just seems like a mess. I need the physical copy, so I'm keeping it. Number 29 is The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is one that I've been meaning to read forever. It sounds very mysterious, very intriguing, and also it's one of the prettiest books I own. I got this edition specifically because it is so beautiful, and it's also a book that really intrigues me and I want to read fairly soon, so I have been saying that for 3 years at this point, but it seems really cool and it's really pretty, so it was definitely one that was going on my list. And finally, the last book that I'm definitely keeping is Nice Try, Jane Sinner by Leanne Olke. I was torn between this and The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Basically, my decision on which one to keep of the two of them came down to the fact that The Secret History was available in more different formats to read it, whether audiobook, ebook, multiple different versions, whereas Nice Try, Jane Sinner is only available in physical form or in ebook form, and while those are both nice, I do like listening to things on audiobook, so this just was a little bit less accessible outside of this physical book, so I decided to keep this. This is like the book that's been at the top of my TBR for over a year. I don't know why I still haven't read it. I'm a mess. I need to read this soon. The main character seems super cool. I'm just very intrigued by this whole book and I want to read it. Now there are some obvious ones that I left off this list that I want to talk about really quickly, namely Haruki Murakami. I've been saying I want to read more of his books for over a year now and I still haven't, but I didn't keep any of his books, and the reason for that is because I like listening to his books on audiobook. I loved the audiobook of 1Q84 and I think that I'd prefer to read his other books in that format as well, so I decided not to keep physical copies of them even though I have a lot of them right here. So those are the 30 books that Marie Kondo couldn't make me part with. I had a lot of fun making this list because it definitely felt like a bit of a puzzle, and I love doing stuff like that and making lists and ranking things, so this was a lot of fun. As always, I will leave links down in the description to my blog, Twitter, and Goodreads. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!